I remember the moment my son stood across from me in my own living room, telling our relatives that I couldn't think straight anymore. He said it casually while holding the keys to my house in his hand. And everyone believed him. Nobody asked how I'd gone from a capable man to someone who supposedly needed supervision overnight. If you've ever had someone twist your reality like that, tell me your story in the comments. Winning $12 million should have felt like a second chance, or at least a break in the long stretch of quiet years after my wife passed. Picking up that check, though, left me strangely drained. Nothing in my medical history explained that kind of weakness. Darren hurried over before I could steady myself. "Let me make you something warm. You need to sit." He didn't wait for a reply. Cups clattered in the kitchen as he moved around, like someone tending to an elderly patient. The tone grated more than the words. He wasn't usually this attentive unless he needed money or a place to crash. A mug appeared in front of me. The surface looked off almost cloudy, but he hovered so close my breath caught in my chest. Hard to question anything while his eyes searched my face. "Drink it, Dad. You look wiped." The scruff along his jaw twitched when I didn't lift the cup right away. My fingers closed around the handle out of habit more than trust. A sip never made it to my mouth. Something in me stalled a faint instinct telling me to wait. That wasn't enough to confront him, not yet. He stepped behind me and started gathering the scattered documents with exaggerated care. "You let me handle the paperwork. I can keep track of this better than you. Too many zeros for you to stress over." A laugh almost slipped out, but the dizziness rushed back before I could form a comeback. He reached for the debit card, peeking out of my wallet. "I'll hold on to this for a bit, just till you're feeling sharper." The pause between his words and his hand closing on the card lasted barely a heartbeat. Arguing would have taken more energy than I had right then, so my head dipped in what probably looked like agreement. Stepping onto the back porch helped more than the drink ever would have. Palms pressed against the railing while my thoughts circled the same question. Was this exhaustion, or something else entirely? The timing gnawed at me. Winning the money, feeling fine, then suddenly unraveling. The house settled behind me, and Darren's footsteps moved from room to room. He hummed under his breath, a habit he picked up as a kid when he felt triumphant. Hearing it now left a strange taste on my tongue. Returning inside the hallway tilted slightly under my feet. Darren called out, "You should get some rest. I'll take care of everything." Darkness pooled along the bedroom walls as I lay down trying to breathe past the shallow pulse tapping behind my eyes. Morning arrived with a weight that didn't lift. Moving through the house took effort, so a walk toward the river felt like the only way to settle the unease. The path along Willamette helped a little, though each step reminded me how unsteady things had become. Muscles dragged, as if someone had removed a piece of my strength overnight. I sat on a bench near the water, didn't calm anything. Doubt crept in, the kind that makes you question every small lapse. A name forgotten yesterday, a misplaced tool, an appointment missed last month. Those moments felt ordinary at the time. Now they lined up like markers pointing at some decline I hadn't noticed. The phone buzzed. First my sister, then a cousin, then another relative I barely speak to unless it's a holiday. "Is everything all right with you? Darren told us you've been slipping a bit." Should we come by? Their tones carried a mix of pity and suspicion. Not one person asked how Darren would know more about my condition than I did. They treated his word as fact, leaving me in the odd position of defending myself against concerns I hadn't raised. A cousin's voice lingered longer than the others. "Maybe let Darren handle your finances for a while, just until you feel better. No shame in that, Cal." Hearing my name said that way stung. The same man once asked me for a loan to keep his business afloat. Now he gave advice like I was sliding toward dependency. Ending the call didn't erase the feeling that something had shifted under my feet. Walking back to the street took more energy than expected. My legs trembled once a quick falter that forced me to pause. People around me kept moving, absorbed in their routines. Nobody saw the way I braced a hand against the railing near the steps. By the time I reached SE Division, hunger nudged me toward a small counter-service place I'd visited for years. A short line formed outside. While waiting, a familiar voice called my name. Maribel stood a few steps behind, arms crossed loosely, brow drawn with quiet concern. She had always read people well, and her eyes stayed on me longer than comfort allowed. "You don't look great, Cal. You all right?" Her tone wasn't intrusive. It carried the steadiness of someone who knew the difference between fatigue and something deeper. "Just tired, I guess." She didn't argue, though. The way she studied me suggested she didn't buy the answer. A small sigh escaped her before she spoke again. "If something feels off, don't brush it aside. That's all I'm saying." She moved forward in line, letting the conversation settle. That brief exchange lingered sharper than anything the relatives had said. She wasn't trying to manage me. She noticed something and simply named it, a rare kind of honesty. The food didn't help much. My hands trembled when paying, and I nearly dropped the card. Leaving the restaurant, the world tilted for a second, just enough to catch myself on the doorframe. Passers-by didn't stop. One person glanced over, then kept going. Back home, the front door was unlocked. Darren's voice drifted from the kitchen. "Dad, your back papers were spread across the table. Bank statements, insurance letters, the folder from the lottery office, even a few personal documents that should have been tucked away." He moved them around with an air of irritation, not curiosity. "You really had these all over the place. I'm trying to sort them before something gets lost." A stack slid from his hand, as if to prove his point, though he'd been the one rifling through everything. The urge to tell him to leave my things alone tightened in my chest, but speaking required more resolve than I had in that moment. He looked at me like someone handling a difficult patient. That look hit harder than his words. "You can't keep track of this right now. Let me help." The phrasing sounded like an offer, yet something colder sat underneath. He was establishing a role, one he believed suited him. Caretaker. Manager, responsible adult. And me. The man who walked into his own home and found his life spread out like a mess he couldn't handle. A murmur rose behind my ribs, the instinct to protect what little stability remained. It never made it to my mouth. I tried to focus on the doorway instead of the state of the documents. The house felt smaller, as if the walls had edged closer while I'd been out. Darren's shadow moved across the papers, rearranging pieces of my life without hesitation. He didn't notice when I drifted toward the hallway. The sound of him flipping through envelopes followed me a few steps, then faded. The message came while I stood in the kitchen pretending to look over a grocery list. "Cal, why aren't you returning calls? Tried you 3 times this week." A coworker I trusted for years had sent it. Confusion tightened my grip on the phone. No missed calls showed up, no voicemails, nothing that matched his concern. Scrolling through the log again didn't change a thing. The screen stayed empty. A chill worked its way down my arms, not from fear, more from the realization that someone else might be managing what reached me and what didn't. Later that afternoon, a neighbor flagged me down near the mailboxes. "Saw your son grab your mail yesterday. Told me you asked him to pick it up while you were resting." He said it casually, the way people make small talk about package deliveries. "I never asked him to do that." The words slipped out quicker than planned. My neighbor blinked, unsettled by my tone, then excused himself with a polite nod before walking away. The walk back to the house stretched longer than it should have. What started as small doubts now formed a pattern. Missed calls, taken mail, rearranged documents. Each incident by itself felt harmless, yet together they carved out a picture I didn't want to accept. Either something serious was happening with my memory, or someone was deciding what I did and didn't receive. Crossing the living room, I noticed Darren crouched beside the router. Changing the Wi-Fi password, he announced before I could ask. "You've mistyped it a few times and locked us out. Easier if I handle it." The explanation came too smoothly. Not angry, not irritated, just matter of fact. He typed fast, then tucked the slip of paper with the new password into his pocket, instead of placing it somewhere accessible. "I'll give it to you later. Just don't stress about it." Stress. That was the word he kept circling back to, as if labeling everything I did under the same umbrella would make it easier to manage me. By evening, he approached again this time, dangling the key to the back door between two fingers. "You misplace these all the time. Let me keep the spare. I'm here most days anyway." His hand closed around the key before any answer formed. A tightening sensation spread through my chest as I stepped away. The room felt smaller. Thoughts tangled around themselves. Was I forgetting more than I realized? Was this actually care, or was something being taken inch by inch, instead of spiraling through that small steps, grounded me? Every document I touched, I photographed. Bank statements, medical slips, even the calendar on the fridge. Each image went into a locked folder on my phone. Darren didn't seem to notice the small precautions. He came and went through the house with a confidence that almost mimicked ownership. Meanwhile, the simplest acts started carrying meaning. Pouring my own drink instead of accepting one from him. Keeping my phone in my pocket instead of leaving it on a counter. Little adjustments that made me feel less like a man fading into dependency and more like someone fighting to stay present. One afternoon, exhaustion crept over me again, yet this time the symptoms didn't match the heaviness of the day after the lottery. My hands steadied once the kettle clicked. Steam rose while I dropped a tea bag into a mug. The surface rippled gently as I poured. Something odd happened then. My arm stayed steady. No tremor, no sudden weakness. It startled me enough that I stopped mid-motion. The spoon hovered above the cup. A slow breath left my lungs. The clarity of that moment cut through the fog I'd been wrestling since the winnings arrived. If the shaking came and went depending on what I consumed, then the explanation wasn't age or stress or bad sleep. The thought hit hard enough that I sat down at the table, palms braced against the grain of the wood. A split second cleared the haze that had been clouding every assumption I held. The pattern sharpened. Darren's drinks, his timing, his insistence that I rest, the way fatigue arrived in waves only after I drank something he prepared. That tea, the one I'd made myself, tasted ordinary. My body felt normal. Too normal. The realization settled in, sinking deeper than anger could. This wasn't a misunderstanding. Something deliberate was happening, and recognition of that truth didn't cause panic as much as it triggered a long, controlled exhale. Countermeasures formed slowly. Nothing rushed. A mental list grew. Avoid anything he handed me, monitor what changed around the house, keep records of everything. Each item came with caution stitched into it. Exposing him too soon, or even confronting him outright, could make things worse. Whatever his intentions were, he believed he had room to tighten his hold. That meant I needed to move carefully. I rinsed the spoon and set it in the drying rack. The movement steadied my breathing. That small act, making a drink without shaky hands, had cracked the certainty he'd been building around me. Walking toward the hallway, fingers brushed the edge of the wall. My steps slowed as another thought emerged, heavier than the rest. If he was willing to control the small things he might have his eyes on, much larger decisions. Steam curled from the mug as I stirred at the counter. The simple act of preparing my own drink brought a steadiness I hadn't felt in days. The moment didn't last. Darren rounded the corner, froze, then rushed forward like he'd caught someone tampering with his belongings. "You're making that yourself now. No attempt at softness." His voice carried accusation, not worry. My hands stayed calm while placing the spoon aside. "Thought I'd try something different this morning." He stepped closer, face tightening. "Different, or you don't trust me?" The question shot out like a challenge. When no immediate answer came, he repeated, "So that's it. You don't trust your own son." The mug settled on the table with a controlled motion. Silence worked better than any excuse. His breathing quickened when I refused to bite the hook he dangled. He pulled out his phone without another word. "Fine. You want to do things your way? Watch this." Dialing before I could react, he spoke loudly as soon as someone answered. "Aunt Linda, I need to tell you something. Dad's slipping. He's confused, getting paranoid. I'm worried he's losing his grip." Eyes fixed on me the whole time. The call continued, his tone shaking with practiced concern. "I don't know what to do. He shouldn't be alone. I'm scared he'll mess up something big." My jaw tightened, though no word came out. Reasoning with someone mid-performance would only fuel the story he wanted to sell. Minutes later, my phone buzzed. The name Uncle Ray flashed across the screen. "Cal, your boy says you're having trouble keeping up. Do you need someone to help manage things for a bit?" Hearing those words from a man who once respected my judgment hit with a force I wasn't ready for. The instinct to defend myself pressed hard against the back of my throat, but nothing formed. Pride wavered, not from guilt, but from the humiliation of being spoken about like a burden awaiting placement. "I'm fine, Ray." The answer sounded smaller than intended. He hesitated. "Just don't be stubborn, okay? We all want what's best." Calls like that erode a foundation faster than any crisis. Not because they believe the lie, but because they believe the liar has good intentions. The afternoon rolled on with a tension that clung to every movement in the house. Walking into my room to grab a notebook, something felt shifted. A drawer sat slightly open. The folder that belonged in the bottom section of my cabinet had been moved to the desk. Bank statements peeked out at odd angles. "You gave me this yesterday," Darren announced from the doorway before I could ask. "Said you couldn't remember what needed signing, so I pulled it out to help." A practiced story offered with a shrug. Nothing in his expression suggested he expected pushback. My chest tightened as I slid the folder back into place. That folder hadn't left its drawer in weeks. Someone else had decided its location now. He leaned against the frame. "Dad, you have to stop stressing. You're making this harder than it needs to be." The sigh he let out painted me as unreasonable before I'd spoken a single word. Relatives chimed in through the day, each one echoing the last, "You need to let Darren help." "Don't overthink it. Don't put yourself through this." Their words piled on top of each other until it felt like resisting him would brand me incompetent in their eyes. Each new message carved a deeper mark. The pain didn't come from the lack of trust. It came from watching my son leverage the role of caretaker to write a version of me I didn't recognize. A narrative where he guided, and I faltered. Where I stumbled, and he caught me. That depiction moved through the family faster than truth ever could. Evening settled in while I sat at the dining table staring at a quiet room that no longer felt like mine. Darren crossed behind me, humming under his breath again the same tune he'd used since childhood when he felt victorious. A shift inside me marked the moment something finally clicked. Explanations wouldn't save me. Logic wouldn't counter what he'd built. Talking would only give him more material. Evidence. That was the only thing that could cut through the web forming around me. My gaze moved toward the living room cabinet where I kept old electronics. A small idea surfaced, not yet fully formed, but clear enough to act on soon. The email arrived while I sat at the dining table sorting receipts into neat piles. Unrecognized device attempted to access your online account. The alert froze me mid-movement. No attempt had come from me. A second notification followed this one from a bank employee I'd known since the utility days. Cal, are you sure the authorized person is supposed to be your son? That line landed harder than the first. He wasn't someone who issued warnings without reason. If he spoke up, something was off. I drove back to the small counter-serve place on SE Division. The same booth where Maribel once pointed out I looked pale. I ordered something simple, but the cup stayed untouched as the last few weeks replayed in my mind the odd mail, the missing files, the relatives behaving like I'd slipped into decline. Then the memory hit. The near fall on the back steps. Legs numb after the drink Darren insisted I take. The tingling in my hands, the warped balance, the hours it took to fade. The realization settled with blunt clarity. Maribel slid into the seat across from me. You all right? Something's off. She studied me, then said, some things people blame on age aren't about age at all. Nothing dramatic. Just truth. It stripped away the last bit of denial. Everything aligned too neatly to ignore anymore. Anger surfaced, not wild, just controlled and deliberate. Years of keeping peace had opened space for people who mistook patience for weakness. When I left, Maribel gave a small nod as if she understood what had shifted. Back home, Darren paced through the living room on a call. Yeah, he's getting worse. Can't keep track of basic things. Hearing my own son narrate my supposed decline with such confidence hardened something in me. When he noticed me, he added, People need to know what's going on, Dad. They care about you. It wasn't care. It was positioning. I had two choices: keep hoping things would right themselves, or act before my independence was erased. I knew which one made sense. When Darren stepped out, I opened the cabinet with old electronics. A box of small cameras sat where I'd left them years ago. They still worked. A quick reset new SD cards, and they were ready. One went in the kitchen, another among the books in the living room. Clean coverage, nothing flashy, just enough to capture what needed capturing. I placed spare batteries in a drawer and closed the laptop. A steadiness settled in, not relief, not victory, but resolve. Evidence changes the rules. A car rolled past outside. The house stayed still. Darren wasn't back yet. I adjusted one camera's angle, then let my fingertips rest on the shelf. No tremor. No weakness. The house stayed still long enough for me to check the first camera. A few minutes of uneventful footage passed until Darren reached into the medicine cabinet, shook 2 pills into his hand, and dropped them into the mug he'd prepared earlier. He stirred, tasted, adjusted the drink like it was routine. I stopped the video. No shock, no yelling, just a cold clarity settling in. Watching the clip again. Photographed the bottle, saved the footage, and pulled together everything else I'd collected. Emails, alerts, screenshots, notes, each file labeled cleanly. Order replaced fear. Structure steadied my thinking. A message buzzed through from an unknown number. Stop making this harder. Let your son handle things, and it'll stay peaceful. Another warning, and another file for the folder. After backing everything up, I changed every password. Long locked final. When I stepped outside, a parked car across the street caught my eye. Engine off, windows, up, no movement. Too deliberate to overlook. I walked back toward the house without acknowledging it. The second camera needed checking. In the living room, I adjusted its angle, and noted how easily Darren had used this space to shape his story about me. A text from my cousin arrived. "Heard you're having a tough time. Darren's doing his best. Lean on him." So the narrative was spreading. I sat back on my heels, letting the truth settle. The symptoms, the confusion, the accidents, none of it random. I scanned the room one more time, felt a steadiness return. Evidence had replaced doubt. The phone rang before I even reached the living room. A representative from the bank spoke with the careful tone professionals use when preparing someone for bad news. "Mr. Hughes, your file has been temporarily restricted. A request came in to verify your decision-making capacity. Until that's resolved, your accounts are on hold." Her words landed like a brick to the chest. That kind of freeze only happened when someone claimed the account holder couldn't manage their own affairs. Someone had triggered a process reserved for people with cognitive decline. Before I could form a response, another call vibrated in my hand. Then another. And another. Messages piled up from relatives, questions, advice, veiled judgments. "Do you need Darren to sign for things right now? Should someone come stay with you? I heard you've been confused lately. Don't fight help." The walls didn't close in, but the noise pressed from every direction. Every voice echoed the same assumption, repeating Darren's narrative until it sounded like scripture. In the middle of that storm, he appeared in the doorway of the living room, hands on his hips like a man carrying too many worries. "Dad, please. Everyone is worried." His voice grew louder, meant for whoever might be listening on the phones scattered across the table. "I just want you safe. People see you're not yourself." The performance was flawless, concern laced with sacrifice, softness layered over control. He paced like someone trying not to cry, glancing toward me with an expression that painted me as fragile. Every word he spoke struck the same places: dignity, competence, independence. Not one part of him faltered. He'd found the pressure point, and he pushed it with confidence. My breath steadied instead of shaking. Whatever happened next couldn't come from panic. He continued, "Dad, please don't make this harder. Let me help before something bad happens." The relatives on speaker murmured their approval, a chorus of support for the wrong person. Walking past them without answering, I headed toward the kitchen. Darren kept talking behind me, voice rising as if volume could cement the lie he'd built. The laptop waited on the counter. Fingers didn't tremble while opening the folder labeled by date. The file I needed sat right at the top. Click. The progress bar filled. The house buzzed with multiple conversations, Darren juggling sympathy from one caller to the next. Carrying the laptop back toward the living room changed the atmosphere. The noise dropped. Darren noticed the shift before anyone else and paused mid-sentence. Something flickered across his face, worry, then calculation, then a moment of pure stillness. I plugged the HDMI cable into the TV. The screen blinked, switching from a paused football game to my desktop. A few pixels settled before the first frame of the video appeared. No speech, no warning. The footage rolled. Darren in the kitchen, opening the medicine cabinet, shaking 2 pills into his palm, stirring them into a mug with measured, practiced movements. Every relative watching froze. The sound of Darren's breathing broke rhythm. For the first time since this entire ordeal began, he couldn't find a script. "That's..." The words stumbled out thin and broken. "Dad, this is taken out of context? I swear that's not..." His face drained color so quickly it looked like he'd stepped out of his own body. Hands twitched at his sides, trying to form gestures that made sense. Nothing came together. An aunt on the video call covered her mouth. Another backed away from the screen as if the footage carried heat. Someone in the room shifted their chair back, metal scraping across the floor. They didn't want to be near him. Darren tried again, voice cracking. "You don't understand. I was helping." He needed. The words dissolved before he reached the end of the sentence. When the video ended, the room stayed silent long enough to feel like an entire evening had passed. The calls on the table went quiet, one by one, as relatives disconnected without saying goodbye. I closed the laptop with deliberate calm. Darren stared at the blank TV screen, mouth slightly open, shoulders shaking, as if his body didn't know whether to collapse or flee. His eyes moved to me, desperate, cornered, grasping for a lifeline that no longer existed. I didn't offer one. Standing still in the center of the room, I watched him try to form explanations that wouldn't come. The truth had already spoken. It didn't need my help. A low hum from the refrigerator drifted in from the kitchen, the only sound left in a room that had finally seen what I'd been living through. My attorney's name sat on the fourth panel from the left. Walking toward it felt different from the walk into any other building. There was no dread, no anger, just a clear understanding of what needed to be done. He greeted me with a firm handshake, already aware this wouldn't be a routine consultation. "You're ready to move forward?" A simple nod answered him. We spent the morning drafting updates to my estate plan. Line by line, he went through every clause. Darren's name came off the documents. Beneficiary fields changed. Authority assignments shifted. When he asked where I wanted everything to go, the decision came without hesitation: a community fund that kept clean water systems running in rural Oregon. All of it, every cent. His pen paused mid-air, but he didn't try to talk me out of it. Men in his line of work learn to recognize when someone has already processed their grief and made peace with their choice. Next came the protective filings. He guided me through the paperwork that restricted Darren's access to my accounts, my home, and any future decisions involving my medical or financial records. Functions Darren once assumed he held by default disappeared with each signature. Leaving the office brought a sense of clarity that didn't feel triumphant so much as necessary. Like finishing a long, overdue repair. By the time I drove back to Selwood, the neighborhood was already murmuring. Word traveled quickly, especially when the subject came from a family as interconnected as mine. Neighbors whispered that Darren had crossed a line. Rumors floated in the air about what he'd done. No one had the full story, but everyone had enough pieces to understand the shape of it. Darren lost his job within the week. A supervisor called to confirm details after someone sent them the footage. Pressure grew from relatives who didn't want his issues anywhere near their own households. Within days, he packed up and left the area. No forwarding address. No goodbye. My phone lit up through all of it. Long apologies, short apologies, explanations wrapped in self-pity, pleas for one more chance, messages accusing me of abandoning him. None received replies. Silence protected me better than any argument. After everything settled, I moved to a modest apartment in northeast Portland. Nothing fancy. A place with enough space for a bed, a small desk, and shelves for the books I'd carried through 2 decades. A few weeks later, a local nonprofit posted an opening for a part-time technical consultant, someone who could help rural teams troubleshoot their water systems. The description matched my old skill set enough to be familiar, but not enough to drag me back into my former life. It seemed honest work, purposeful, manageable. Their field manager interviewed me over coffee. "You sure you want part-time?" "With your experience, we'd take you full-time in a heartbeat." Part-time is exactly what I want. The job fit like a well-worn glove. I didn't have to supervise anyone, just help solve problems and keep plumbing systems functional in small communities with limited resources. The tasks felt tangible again. Pipes, valves, pressure readings. Things that didn't lie or manipulate. One afternoon near the end of summer, a knock sounded at my apartment door. Maribel stood there holding a folded community newsletter. "Thought you might want this," she said with a small smile. "They're hosting a volunteer day next weekend. Might be your kind of thing." We didn't talk about Darren. We didn't revisit any moment from those chaotic weeks. Our conversation stayed on light topics: the weather, her work, the water system project I was helping with in Yamhill County. A comfortable rhythm settled between us. She left the newsletter on the entryway table before heading out. The door clicked gently behind her. I walked to the bookshelf where a cardboard storage box waited. The last few pieces from the ordeal rested on the table: a copy of the restraining order, a duplicate of the estate documents, the printed email alerts from the bank. Each sheet slid into the box without ceremony. No bitterness, no relief. Just closure. The tape sealed the lid with a soft rip. My hands lifted the box onto the highest shelf next to a few old binders from my working years. It blended into the room, just another item stored away. Grabbing my jacket from the back of a chair, I opened the apartment door and stepped into the hallway. The building hummed with its usual late-afternoon bustle: neighbors returning from errands, someone carrying groceries, a distant dog barking from a balcony. I locked the door and walked toward the stairwell, thinking about the tasks I still needed to finish before evening. Nothing heavy, just the kind of small responsibilities that built a steady life. The corridor stretched ahead in uncomplicated lines, no eyes watching, no steps trailing behind me, a simple, open path.